Institution is the leader in MBA admissions consulting because we're a different kind of MBA admissions consulting firm. We have a full-time team of MBA admissions professionals. Sign up for a free 30-minute consultation to get honest and thoughtful advice about your candidacy today.
All right, I'm going to add everybody to the stream. Thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you so much for joining us here. Something terrible is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Something terrible is happening. Okay, so I think it's not happening anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's all right.
I think it's not happening.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's not happening. Karishma, I think it's your computer. Maybe you have the YouTube video open. I think when I muted you, it was all good. Muted you, it was all good. All right, I'm gonna give another shot. Hopefully things will be fine. No problem at all. This is just live, so it's okay. No problem at all. This is just live, so it's okay. No problem at all. I mean, as much as I would love to hear myself like 3 times, Karishma, there's something funky going on. So maybe you can check your mic settings, or maybe just log off and come back to StreamYard. Maybe that will help.
I would see if it's working.
That will help. Awesome. All right, cool. I'm going to wait for Karishma to come back, but thanks everyone for joining. We're doing a panel on GMAT versus GRE, and we have a ton of folks here. So we're going to get started real quick. So before getting started, I have a ton of questions on GMAT versus GRE. My name is Shovik. I've been on GMAT Club for a while now. I don't want to go ahead and introduce myself, but I've taken this test. I've taken both of these tests fairly recently. I've taken the GMAT 6-7 times, and I've taken the GRE in 2020 because I was bored and it was a lockdown. So I have some opinions about this test, but I want to validate some of this with our panel. But before we jump into everything, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce everybody. So I'm just going to go ahead through what I see on my screen. So Kathleen, I would love to start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Edwards. I am here from Goizueta Business School at Emory University in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, representing our 2-year and 1-year full-time MBA programs, and have been with the team for a long time and pursued an MBA myself. And so I did take the GMAT. I took it twice and got the exact same score, so which is not common, I think, but that's my story. So I do feel your pain, but and I also appreciate all the time and effort that goes into the application process. So thank you.
It happens way more than you would think. It happens so many times. Taya, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taya. I am from Michigan Ross, Senior Associate Director of Admissions with the full-time MBA program. Have also been on the team a very long time. And in that time have definitely see trends change with the GMAT versus the GRE, and now some people submitting applications without a test as well. So happy to share my thoughts on that.
Awesome. Charles, this is like the 100th time you're introducing yourself on the GMAT Club YouTube channel. But let's just do it one more time.
Charles Bibelos, been a GMAT and GRE tutor for about 20 years, run a little company called GMAT Ninja. And yeah, looking forward to talking to some good admissions folks who know what they're doing and can help us sort out the question we get all the time about GMAT GRE. So thank you for having me again.
Hi, Maria.
Hi. How's it going? Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Wich-Vila. I am an HBS graduate and the founder of ApplicantLab.com, which is like a DIY platform that provides affordable admissions consulting advice. So admissions consultants are great, but sometimes their fees might be a bit too much. And if they are, come to Applicant Lab and get advice from me. I've been doing this for 19 years. So Charles, obviously, always the wiser one between the two of us.
Just the older, grayer one, I think, Maria.
I'll compete with you on that one. We can offline. We can compare. But anyway, so yeah. So if you want 19 years worth of admissions experience tied into an affordable online package, please do check out applicantlab.com.
Karishma, you fixed it. I'm so happy you're back. I just wanted to
The video
quickly
was
say
working
before
fine.
you introduce yourself that Karishma is probably the most prolific moderator GMAT Club has ever seen. So you're amazing. So I'm talking to you for the first time, and I'm so excited. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, Shavik. So it's great being here. I have been working in GMAT Club for the past 13, 14 years, and it has been an awesome journey. And recently, I founded my own platform called anglesandarguments.com, and we have started with GMAT tutoring on that. We provide modules and tutoring, and hopefully, I'm going to be starting with GRE soon as well.
Awesome. Cool. That's an awesome panel. Thanks so much for the time today. We have we're going to plan on ending by 7:43-ish because Taya, I know you have a Michigan Raw Zoom session. So I want to make sure that everybody can also go there. But I want to start with Kathleen and Taya, you two. The GMAT versus GRE thing is a fairly new development. I know schools have accepted GRE since forever, but we have seen more people interested in the GRE since things went virtual. And when I started just looking into virtual tests and taking some of them, GMAT, to be honest, has not done a great job in being virtual. GRE was a significantly smoother experience. So, Kathleen, I wanted to start with you. What are some of the trends that you are seeing with candidates? Are people really taking the GRE a whole lot more?
So yeah, that's a great question. And like everywhere else in the world, the pandemic upended everything, all our normal processes for testing and also for the waiver process, everything like that. So we really had to adjust. We did see an increase in GRE tests submitted. We have seen an increase over the past 10 years that we've been accepting the GRE in addition to the GMAT. I'm already going to make some people angry in that we still don't have as much data on the GRE compared to the GMAT, so we still don't publish a GRE average score for our incoming class. But it is an increasing percentage every year, so I think we're getting closer and closer to publishing more data, having a better sample size to be able to present that average score as a useful metric for candidates. But so increasing number of test scores, but still predominantly GMAT. But then also we provided a COVID access disruption test waiver request process to help address these issues. And so that was the main reason we offered that was because of the disruption to the accessibility of testing, the security issues, the computer issues, all those sorts of things. We wanted to be able to provide students the ability to apply, even if they weren't able to take the test as planned. So that has been successful. And so we are continuing that process and that option in addition to the GMAT and GRE.
Awesome, cool. Thanks for sharing that. Taya, is that similar to the Michigan Ross experience as well?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Kathleen pointed this out, but we were seeing an increase in GRE test takers before things went virtual, before the pandemic. So we've been, GMAT is still the most common test for sure, but it has been increasing for a while now. So I think, like Kathleen said, the past decade, in the beginning, my early years at Ross, it was very, very few people. We didn't publish averages either, and now we have a pretty substantial group of people that take the GRE every year and have been very successful in classes and recruiting. And like Kathleen said, we started a policy, like a test waiver policy, and closely monitoring that. That is still a small data set, but closely monitoring that, and early indicators all indicate that people are doing pretty successful in that as well.
Gotcha. So Maria, when you coach candidates for business school admissions, I'm guessing you're also seeing more questions around GMAT versus GRE, which test to take. What's your go-to advice when people ask you that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the good news is that it's been sort of like this positive upward spiral where with the schools accepting the GRE much more commonly, now I think candidates are far more comfortable submitting it. When I was applying to business school 20 years ago, the GRE was accepted by some programs. It wasn't accepted by others. It was more like if you were a dual degree candidate. And so it was like, well, I took the GRE anyway for this other graduate school. And so why make me take 2 tests? But the idea at that time, at least, was like, yeah, maybe you can apply with the GRE, but it's definitely not viewed in the same light as the GMAT. And I definitely think that that's changing. And I think that's great news, because I do think that because of the type of audience that the GMAT attracts as test takers, I do think it is significantly more difficult to, for example, get a higher quant percentile score versus on the GRE test, which attracts test takers who are who are applying to all sorts of programs, right? For English literature, social work, education, what have you. And so because there's like that broader spread of people taking the GRE, I do think that it's better for you to shine often with the GRE.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that just for context, so I've taken the GMAT multiple times. I've been on GMAT Club for a long, long time, but I took the GRE cold with like zero prep, and I was able to get. I think my score was a 332 or a 331, which is fairly high with like zero prep. But also, I felt when I took the test, I didn't really see it testing the same skills as the GMAT does. I mean, sure, there are some common things like reading comp and critical reasoning and some quant. But to me, the GMAT was almost built and designed to be an MBA or a management admission test, while the GRE, as you mentioned, Maria, is kind of like a catch-all mechanism for all sorts of grad programs. So my question for you, Charles and Karishma, and maybe I can start with Karishma and then move to you, Charles. When your students ask you the question that, hey, Karishma, what test should I take, GMAT versus GRE? I think that's one segment. And there's this another segment of like, hey, I'm really terrible at the GMAT. Can I just take the GRE instead? How do you make sure that they're still, preparing with the right tools for a very different test?
Right. So first of all, look, let me take your question where, how do I guide them whether they should take GMAT or GRE? Right. First of all, as of now, we understand that GRE is getting more and more accepted in various schools, but, it's relatively new and I would say a little riskier. I mean, when I would advise my students and guide them, I would ask them whether they are very clear that they want to go to a B school. In case that clarity is there, then perhaps I would want them to consider GMAT instead of GRE. GRE is certainly better in case they are not very clear on where they want to go. If they want to consider other programs as well, then perhaps GRE would be a better option. But in case it is B school and they're really, really committed to it, then I would suggest them to figure out whether GMAT is the test that they would like to take. I mean, I do understand, look, it does test higher order thinking. And, as you said, that it is made for people who want to go to B school, right? It is testing those skills which are going to be really relevant to you once you go to B school. And in fact, in later life as well, in later career, like for example, grammar and, writing concisely, and there should be no redundancy and stuff like that. So that is why I normally tell them that it's not like you're preparing for a test to get into the school. It's like you're preparing for the entire later life. But in case, we discuss on what their strengths and what their weaknesses are. In case they feel that memorization is easier for them, in case they feel that applying advanced concepts is a little harder for them, those are the traits of GMAT where memorization involved is very little, but you have to apply advanced concepts. In case they feel that is a little difficult for them, then they prefer GRE, and then we try and work. We test them whether what kind of skills are they more comfortable with. I share some different kinds of examples of the 2 tests with them, and then we decide on which to go for.
Gotcha. Charles, I want to ask you the same question as well, but at GMAT Club, I know folks have been working to build something to do exactly that, Karishma. So we recently released it's a version of a GMAT Club test, which I think it's a 75-minute test, and it can It has both GMAT and GRE type questions for students to figure out which test might be a better fit for them. I see the link in the chat, so go ahead and give it a shot. But Charles, you took the GRE recently, which I'm also going to assume with zero prep, you just got a 340, which is fairly ridiculous. But how do you coach your students on this same dilemma?
I mean, I'm cheating. I've been studying for the GRE for 20 years, so
Sure.
it's not as impressive as it sounds. Honestly, a lot of it for us is that it becomes as much an admissions question as a testing or skill question. So if we have a student that comes along and it's very, very obvious from their skill set, the previous scores, whatever, that they can get into the, let's say, the mid 700s on the GMAT, why not take the GMAT, right? Like that's probably going to do more for them in admissions. Where we start to think about the GRE or recommend it more is if that doesn't look like it's going to be a realistic goal in the amount of time that student has left. So, honestly, we funnel some of our students that are a little bit weaker on verbal or quant towards the GRE, because I do think there's, and the admissions folks I would love to hear pushback on this, but people respond around numbers. So I think that, you get a 700 or above, that's going to do something for you psychologically in the mind of the person reading the application that a 690 is in. And that's just human nature. GRE, get past a 160, that's going to do something for you. And maybe it's very subtle. And we'd like to say that we don't think about the test that way because it's 1 point between 159, and 160, 160. But one of the things anecdotally we see year after year is, it seems like the students that cross some threshold, depending on where they're applying, seem to do a little bit better than the ones that fall just short. Right. So a lot of how we think about it is if you can get an elite GMAT score, by all means do it. If not, for whatever your goals are. If not, then we start having the conversation. All right, is the GRE going to be a faster path to a score that's going to make you reasonably competitive? If somebody has really weak quant skills, they struggle to absorb quant. GRE is just a narrower domain of quant. The questions are less puzzle-like. GRE is much more straightforward. Here's the things we're going to test you on. We're going to give you that hexagon question pretty much every exam. Learn some geometry stuff. You're okay, and you can get to a defensible score, right? Much faster. And verbal for some people who don't have phenomenal reading skills, we're going to really struggle to get them to an elite GMAT score. And then the question is, can we get you to something that is reasonably competitive, something like a 160 on the verbal on the GRE? So it becomes as much an admissions question as anything. And if our students are working with admissions consultants already, we tend to work with the admissions consultant or send them to one that we trust to say, hey, with this profile, what do you think? We're going to have a hard time getting them past a 700 quickly, but I think we can get them 160 on the GRE. How does that land for you as an admissions person?
Gotcha. So we have some admissions people here. So Taya, you mentioned that, both you and Kathleen mentioned that you don't have a lot of data points on GRE or like alternative tests. So how do you make the decision, like on what's an acceptable score? Because for the GMAT, we kind of know that a Q50 is like a 92nd percentile. We have historical data on what that roughly translates to in terms of GPA. How do you make the decision on what GRE score is good or good enough?
Yeah, I mean, we publish our averages. So our average is usually around a 160, Charles. So I'm very interested to look at the psychology behind that number now that you're pointing that out. But it is, sometimes I will say sometimes it is a 159, 160 or a 161, 160, but it's usually right around a 160, 160. So we do have a lot of data around like what our averages are, what success looks like academically and recruiting wise for students with GRE test scores. And it is like we were talking about those converters earlier. We do not use converters at all. Like we look, because we have a number of, like we have so much data on GRE test takers, we look at our own data and like what metrics of success, like, look at our own metrics of success for what our applicants are doing with those GRE scores. So I do actually remember, Maria, when you were talking about it's only dual degree, like it was mostly dual degrees, and being like, oh, well, you're not applying for a dual degree. Why are you submitting a GRE? You must have a terrible GMAT score you don't want to tell us about. And that's like, that thought does not cross our minds anymore at all. So I think, like I said, our averages are around a 160, 160, but I mean, this is a test focused panel. Obviously tests aren't everything. We have a lot of people who have great GMAT scores, great GRE scores, or don't submit a test that aren't going to be admitted because the rest of their application isn't as strong too.
So Kathleen, similar question, but I also want to touch on the no test option as well. So Taya mentioned something which empowers me to ask this, like, how do you know if someone didn't submit a test because their scores were terrible?
Well, sometimes they accidentally tell us, which is a whole other issue. But in general, what we're doing is trying to maintain the validity and the accuracy, the integrity of our process. So that's what we've been doing the whole way through. And so, like Taya was saying, that we initially started accepting the GRE to broaden and diversify our applicant pool, and that's the same reason we continue with the test waiver. So we don't want to provide unnecessary barriers to application, of course. So that's incumbent upon us to make sure that we have a solid review process based on data, based on what we know of our past successful students, and using the information we do have. So of course, transcripts, professional work, to assess someone's readiness to hit the ground running in our classroom and be competitive in the classroom as well as after graduation in terms of the job search process. So it has been challenging. I think the majority of students are submitting test scores, even with the waiver option, for sure. It doesn't affect, we work hard to make sure that all those non-test score candidates are still considered equally for scholarship and for admission. But as like Taya said, we're on a test focused panel here. If it was just about the test score and we were isolating that, our jobs would be much easier. There probably would be fewer jobs in our field too. So we'd just be doing numerical decisions, but it always has been more about more than just the test score. So it's just extrapolating that out and making the most of all the information we can get. And I've said this too, if someone is submitting a waiver request, or that sort of thing, and they have other academic information they can share, like a non-GMAT GRE test score, or even an expired GMAT GRE test score, other components, things like that they can share with the committee. That does help us make that admission, that academic readiness assessment.
Kathleen, if you don't mind me jumping in, are you saying the same thing out of your GRE candidates that they're saying at Ross, where the people who take the GRE and are admitted are just as successful as the students who take the GMAT?
Yes, so that's with the same way that Taya mentioned. We're looking at the percentile scores. We're looking at our current students and past students, our faculty reporting, our faculty research, in terms of how to assess the GRE score and competitiveness for admission. And so, yes, we are seeing their success in the classroom. We haven't seen a significant difference between the two. There's a higher correlation between the IR score on the GMAT and core semester GPA than in any other test section, but that's the only kind of, we didn't rank them in order, if that makes sense.
So does that mean that you're taking the IR more seriously in the admissions process now, or not necessarily?
We're definitely aware of it, it's more of an interesting factor for us, and it's something that we're definitely aware of, but it's not going to knock someone out of contention if their total score is solid.
Gotcha. I mean, the IR score for years and years have been like, yeah, whatever, I don't really care about it. But I'm really happy to hear that it's actually proving to be beneficial. One more question from you, Taya and Kathleen. I see a lot of trends. I don't know whether they'll stop on just deprioritizing test scores. I see that for undergrad admissions all the time on getting rid of the SATs. Assuming that the pandemic is kind of over and people are just going to go to test centers and take the test. Do you see business schools going in that direction where tests become like a thing of the past and you have enough data point on GPA or academics to make a reasonable admission decision?
I don't know if I'd say it's going to be a thing of the past completely. I think of it as it is a good way to reduce barriers and build diversity in the class, to offer the option to not take a test. I think, right. Shovik, one of the things you were saying earlier is the GMAT is, if you want to do a business school, it seems like it's prepared for that. And I was thinking about that in terms of, we want to be admitting teachers and military members and all different people to the class. And so thinking about people who weren't made for the GMAT, but might have really strong quantitative skills and be able to be successful in accounting and finance, just didn't take the test or not able to take a test. And
Yeah.
So I think having if you can take the GMAT and get a great score, that's a way to help you stand out. You might not have a background in quantitative in this, and that's going to help you stand out. Even if you do have a strong quantitative background, a strong score is going to be a great data point for us to have.
Yeah.
It's not easy to get, so I think they'll stay, but I do think it's pretty likely that this option to not have a test is probably going to continue going forward. Like I said earlier, we have some early indicator, we have students interning who were admitted without a test at all MBB, at Barclays, at Morgan Stanley. They're able to get jobs. They're able to be successful in classes. That's not every student. They had other things in their background that were I have a CFA, so there's other things in their background. They just don't have a GMAT.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So, Taya, are you saying that the employers are also not partial towards the GMAT? That either GRE or no test also works in the same way for the employees as well?
I mean, our data set's small. It's very small right now. So I'm not going to say one thing or another, and I'm not a recruiter, but they're looking at their professional background too. And they're looking at all these other factors as well, along with that when you're interning for a job. And so it's not, I wouldn't say it's just because you don't have a strong GMAT score, it means you're automatically out if you're really smart and talking to this person and they like you.
Right.
That's what, just to piggyback on that, I know that over the years, the expectation from iBanking and MBB has been a GMAT and a very competitive one. From our career team, I'm hearing that is less of an emphasis and less of a standard requirement. So it's still that, I think it's a bit, I understand the risk of not having a solid GMAT if that is your goal. So I understand wanting to pursue that, but it is being less emphasized. So, but it is still something we want to make candidates aware of on the front end, so they're not surprised in hearing it later when they're already past the application process.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to agree to that so much. Karishma, I kind of was fairly exposed to recruiting across different sectors, except for iBanking. I kind of pretty much did everything else. Nobody cared about my GMAT. So when I read a lot about if you want to get into big consulting firms, blah, 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 you need a 750, all fake news. Nobody asked for my GMAT.
Yes. Is it not a part of your resume?
I mean, it was for me. I had a very high GMAT score, but again, nobody cared. Just when I look at folks who got internships or offers, their test scores were kind of all over the place, So I don't think maybe it's not as big of a deal. But Kathleen, I wanted to double click on something Thea said. For me, the GMAT was really important because GPA for Indian universities are all over the place, right? We don't have a standard 4.0. Different universities have different rigor in terms of grading. A lot of it is very non-standard, right? So for me, the GMAT was really important because even though I will say in my application that, I was in the top 10 percentile, but my GPA looks weird, right? For me, the GMAT kind of put me on a solid, well-founded footing. How do you then deal with for non-test takers or non-traditional test takers coming from places like India or even Southeast Asia who do not have a very well-defined GPA for their undergrad? How do you measure their academic performance?
Sure. Well, we have a lot of experience with transcripts from all over the world and variety. So to some extent, we're using that knowledge and our faculty experts who have even a more in-depth background in the Indian education system. But also we're looking a lot at work experience if someone stands out in that sense, where if we know ultimately what we're deciding is if someone is ready for our program and also if someone will be successful in the job search process with our support and our partnership. So the same criteria are important in terms of progression, exposure to the different aspects of an organization, and their well thought out career goals and connection and communication between the two. So certainly we are open to applicants from all over the world and put it and work hard to make sure that we're reviewing those transcripts thoroughly and correctly. And but like everything else, even schools in the U.S. are not identical by any means, even though they have the same GMAT scale or GPA scale, excuse me. We have a neighbor school down the road, Georgia Tech, and the people in different majors will tell you exactly the different majors are very different. So we're used to comparing apples and oranges and pears and kumquats and kiwi fruit. So that's what we do.
Gotcha. Maria, I wanted to ask you a question around just how you evaluate profiles. Like, I know you don't do this very often, but a big part of admission consulting business is getting on the phone with people and just trying to suss out some of their school choices and giving them a quick review of their profile. That's big thing in the admission consulting industry. And the GMAT or the GRE has been a fairly big part of that. Do you see that changing with the shift in no test or GRE, or just being more test flexible on how candidates are evaluated across the board?
I mean, I think, first of all, to echo something that others have said, all else being equal, a strong GMAT score is preferable to a strong GRE score. But if we do have sort of like a marginal client who just can't break that 700 barrier on the GMAT, or whatever that psychological line that Charles was saying, I do advise people to look more carefully at the GRE, because I think we've had decades now of having an intuitive sense of what is a good GMAT score, what is a high GMAT score. But so, for example, Shovik, earlier in the session, when you humble bragged about your high GRE score that you took when you took the test blind, it took me a second to think about oh gosh, so what is, though that is a pretty good score, because I know that 160 is, but when I know your GMAT score, it's immediate. It's oh yeah, poof, Shovik killed it on the GMAT. And so I think that sort of intuition around the GRE no longer exists. Now, to go back to your question more directly, you were asking about assessing someone's admissions chances. Honestly, for me, once a certain academic barrier is crossed, once I have confidence that the candidate can prove that they can handle the schoolwork, then for me, it's a lot more about work experience, right? Someone with a 780 or an 800 GMAT who has spent the past 5 years of their life just playing video games in their parents' basement, they're not getting in anywhere. Right. But someone who has led a division of a multinational corporation, I've had clients with get sub 700s on the GMAT. I have them take the GRE, and then they get into Stanford, they get into Harvard, Wharton, they get into Ross, they get into Emory, they get into all of these great schools, because the GRE, it's less of a barrier. But honestly, when I'm doing a profile assessment, it is all about the impact that they've had, much more so. For me, the academics is just a barrier. It's a checkbox. Yes or no? Can they do the work? Yes. Am I a little iffy? Then maybe the test is more important.
Right.
And then in terms of whether or not you shouldn't even, this school is test optional, maybe I should take advantage of that. I like to quip that test optional does not mean brain optional. So in fact, if you don't take a test and you apply to a test optional school, you're putting that much more pressure on the other aspects of your profile. And so in your case, Shovik, for example, applying from a college in India, you went to a good college, but I don't believe it was the shining IITs, So for you, taking the GMAT was a super smart move, because that let you prove to the admissions officers at the schools that you were applying to that, hey, I can hang with I can totally compete with these other people from these fancy schmancy schools, even though I went to a college that you may not immediately recognize as much as some of these other names. So, if you are going to go test optional, I don't think that everyone should just be heaving a sigh of relief, because then in that case, they're actually putting so much more pressure on that undergraduate transcript or on other indicators of their intellect.
Yeah.
And I think where you're spot on, Maria, and this is the conversation we try to have with applicants. And a lot of the time, they don't want to hear it from a tutoring company, because we say because they'll come in and they'll say, oh, I need a 750. They have some score in mind. Or maybe they'll ask us, what score do I need? And it's well, we need to talk about your profile and what else is going on here. Because if you had a 2.3 GPA from University of I've never heard of it, and maybe the rest of your application isn't amazing, then I'm not even, and you're trying to get in Harvard or Stanford or Wharton or something, then we're gonna have some hard conversations. And I think we do this thing culturally where we try to keep the test separate from the application process. And it sometimes does a disservice to the student, because if you ask me like, hey, what score do I need to get into my target schools? It's like, well, I can't answer that unless I know a whole lot about your profile.
Yeah. It's a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. That's what I keep telling my students. Yeah.
They don't like hearing it from me either, Charles, for the record. They're like, I'm applying to Harvard anyway. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know that they're judging, I don't know that McKinsey's recruiters are looking for Fortnite skills, but, knock yourself out. I warned you.
I mean, I would say, Maria, Fortnite is tough. It's not easy. There's a lot of analytical skills that goes in there. I'm sure your kid would totally disagree with you. But Taya, Kathleen, my question for you, I think Maria gave us some extreme cases, which I totally agree. Like, your profile is super important. I think what I'm curious to know, a lot of applicants to business school have fairly similar experiences, right? Like, you get thousands and thousands of people applying to schools where, again, like, I don't know the underbelly of admissions and how you like look at resumes and look at packets and applications. But how do you, I think for me, just looking from the outside in, a test score is a very, very clear way to look at very similar profiles as, one very scientific variable that helps a candidate. And it also helps, your school stats as well. You have two very identical candidate, one with, I don't know, like a 690 GMAT and one with a 760 GMAT. And I know no two candidates are identical. I totally get that. But I just assume for this example that they are. Isn't it reasonable to assume, I'll start with you, Kathleen, isn't it reasonable to assume that the person with the 760 has a much higher shot of getting in? And if it is reasonable, I wonder what a test waiver or having a lot of test flexibility does to that comparison.
Well, first of all, you mentioned an underbelly of admissions that made it sound like there's a seedy underbelly, dark side of admissions, which I've been in this for a long time, and I can promise you that there is not. We're not that exciting.
The reason why I bring it up is because from the app. By the way, I worked with a Ross Admissions for a long time, so yeah. I'm kind of fairly well versed. But on GMAT Club, looking from the outside, it does feel like a total black box. Like, it does feel like I don't know anything on what's going on in the admission process. For all I know, they had a magic 8-ball to decide my chances.
Yeah, so I understand that, and we do try to make it as transparent as possible, because I think that the mystery, the demystifying it would just be disappointing, because there's really not that much mystery involved. It's pretty straightforward in terms of what we're talking about, the factors that we consider and the way we consider them. The question was, if all things considered, if we're just looking at the test score, of course, a strong GMAT or a strong GRE score is never going to hurt a candidate. So there's no way that it could possibly be a downside to have a really strong score, especially if you feel it's a well representative of your ability in the program and your ability academically and that sort of thing. So a stronger test score is always going to be a positive addition to an application file. And it can be, when we are screening thousands of applications, it is a helpful tool to assess and make decisions. So that's just the fact. But we have to have multiple data points to be able to make decisions, because we can't rely on just one as being the ultimate deciding factor. So I don't know if that helps answer the question.
So to Taya, maybe I'll ask you the same thing. So why have test waiver to begin with? Like, why have the option? Because I understand having that option during COVID, because a lot of people literally couldn't take tests. Mm-hmm. What's the value now on having a test waiver?
Well, because every application isn't exactly the same. In the scenario you're giving, if I were to look at somebody who has a 750 and somebody who has a 690 and their recommendation, I mean, that would raise many flags, and probably neither would get in if they were exactly the two applications are exactly the same. Yes, you're going to choose the higher test score, because that is the one element where one is clearly better than or stronger than the other. But that is not the reality. And so I think the reason is we saw a number of people who cited different reasons where they weren't able to take a test, or they, I don't know all of their, like, the rationale. Maybe they couldn't have done well in the test. I don't know for sure, but there are a lot of reasons that are going forward that we have really great candidates. We have people who are in leadership positions, and why not give those students a chance to be admitted and to be members of the class just because they couldn't take a test? Like, they're doing well in the classes. They're taking on leadership positions. Like, it just seems like a way to be giving some people an option to, to get an MBA and move forward and do this. And so why not give them that option? There's only, it's a small percentage of the class that has a waiver, or it didn't take a test to get in. It's last year was a little less than 20%. I don't expect us to be more than 20% this year. Right. So it's not a majority by any means, but for those students that for some reason they aren't able to take a test and they're going to be really great members of the community, like, why not give them a chance?
So when you say 20%, Taya, is that 20% of applicants?
That's of the actual class. So of the 400-ish students, about 20% of the class.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's a totally valid use case on, like, maybe we have been doing this wrong for the last 50, 60 years of business school admissions, and maybe a test waiver is a really good opportunity. I think where my question comes from is maybe it's because it's super fresh data points. It's just not having enough transparency on what a test waiver does for an application. And as you're saying today, that a test waiver is more of an accessibility feature rather than like, I just don't want to take the test feature, which makes total sense. Karishma, Charles, wanted to circle back with you on, when you prep students on GRE versus GMAT, like that typical question, if you see more schools being open to waiving tests and more schools being open to taking the GRE or any other alternate tests, does your recommendation change on the GMAT? Because Karishma, you mentioned that I would still prefer that you take the GMAT if you're set on a management program.
Right. So Shavik, it really depends. In case GRE becomes a lot more acceptable, and basically the difference between them is that they are two very different kind of tests. But in case the schools are absolutely okay with both the tests, and we have some more data points going forward, and we do realize that there isn't really a risk factor that we feel right now that there is with GRE or no test. Once that situation becomes clear, I think we would probably also take it a lot more seriously. And in case the situation does demand, in case we feel that the student is better suited to GRE, we would probably offer it a lot more going forward, even for B schools. Today, normally my recommendation for GRE is for the other programs, not really the business programs. Sure. Only in very rare cases do we go in for GRE for business programs. But yes, going forward, if the schools, view them in a similar manner, and as we are learning today that even the employers don't really mind as such, they're not really looking for a high GMAT score and all, which we always feel is a safe thing to have in our kitty. If that is not the situation going down the line, of course, our recommendation would also be a lot more open, and we would also include GRE a lot more.
Yeah, that's definitely the condition. Like, employers really don't care. I'm not sure about iBanking. That's the only industry that I'm not fully aware of. All right, I just got a note that I just completely lost track of time. But I just got a note that the raw Zoom session is starting up, so I kind of have to end the session. But I just wanted to circle back with you. Has anybody had any more questions for anybody else in the panel that we didn't get to?
If I can make one quick wisecrack, that I think the tests get it wrong a lot of the time. And if you start with that assumption that sometimes the tests just misidentify whether somebody has great academic skills or not. And a lot of the time on the low end, it's test anxiety. People freak out taking tests. And I think the whole business of, there's a whole lot of different ways to skin that cat now. And it's not GMAT, and there's different tests you can take and there's waivers. I think it's wonderful because when we get a student that's really got a huge psychological barrier or some other barrier to getting a great score, I think it's fantastic to be able to say, no, you don't have to bash your head through the GMAT brick wall anymore. So it's great to hear what you two have to say about kind of how you're approaching it in admissions, because I think it's absolutely wonderful for applicants. And it's the right way to approach it. Tests get it wrong all the time, unfortunately. So I like what you're kind of the way admissions is moving.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Charles. I totally agree. I wish I didn't have to spend a lot of years on the GMAT. That would have been pretty cool. All right, cool. Thanks for the time, everyone. Taya, I know you have to run, but thanks so much for talking about GMAT GRE. We have a bunch of other panels coming up. We have one in an hour about ROI of the MBA and whether spending $250,000 is kind of worth it. I think it is, but I'm just not going to spoil anything. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.
All right.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.